Hello and welcome to first ever Trans Plus History Week event. My name's Marty Davis, and I am the founder of Trans History Week, and I'm delighted that you've all joined us today. Now, I'm going to jump straight into it. I'm going to just give you an overview of the agenda for today. So we are firstly going to have a keynote with renowned historian Morgan Page. And then we're going to give you a quick overview of our guidance document that we released just over a week ago now. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with some trans trailblazers and history makers to discuss that guidance and talk about their own views on trans history, which I'm really excited about. So, but before all that, I just want to talk a little bit about Trans History Week and what we're doing. So Trans History Week is all about making extra space in the calendar globally to talk about and observe and learn our history. It's about the history of gender diversity through the ages. And it's the way I like to talk about it is it's the history lesson that we never had. I mean, I certainly never had it. So when I was at school in the UK, my whole schooling took place under Section 28 law, which meant that LGBTQ plus history wasn't taught. Nothing about LGBTQ plus was taught. My identity was erased within that environment. And that still has a legacy today. And similar laws are in place across the world and are still in place. And the legacy is there. The impact is there. We really see it at the moment in our discourse. We see that transgender people are talked about as a modern fashion, a transgender trend, a social contagion, a contested belief. Language like this that really dehumanizes all of us. But what's really amazing about our history and the learning of it, and the really geeky thing about it is that it shuts all of this down through something really quite geeky. You know, we've been here forever and a day, and we go way back, and that's just a fact. What I really think is really valuable about this project as well is that education for me really feels like a source to liberation. And isn't that great that we can, just by learning about things and sharing things that are interesting, we can really work to liberate each other. And I also believe that in a world full of so much negativity and anti this and anti that, it's really powerful to be pro things. And we're pro the learning of history. And you know, we're for education and we're for the celebration of our histories. You know, it's a really important thing for me. This whole project has been a really great source of well-being. It's that feeling, if you're immersing yourself in the fact that we've always been here, you really feel like you belong here right now. That's powerful. That's powerful for all of us. So that's what Trans History Week is. That's what we're about. We're making space for trans plus people to share their stories, to share stories of our ancestors and their learnings with the world. So let's get into it. And I'm going to just cover a bit of housekeeping before we jump into the keynote. So you've got the chat box in this meeting, so please use that. And please, I see that you're already using the React, so please use those. Can I see that everybody's using them? Let's see some love hearts. Go on, I deserve some love, right? Thank you. Oh God, loads. Amazing. So I'm going to introduce, with all of this love in the room, I'm going to introduce Morgan M. Page, pronouns she, her. So Morgan is a historian and writer. They're co-writer of the feature film Framing Agnes and creator of the Trans Plus History podcast, One from the Vaults, of which I am one of the avid listeners of. You know, I'm not a historian myself. I'm an enthusiastic learner, and I've learned a lot from listening to Morgan Page. And I will ask Morgan to join us today to share with us some stories from history, over 10 minutes, and also to start with the story behind the May the 6th date that actually starts our week of Trans History Week this year. So I am going to hand over to you, Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Morgan and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm excited to dish about trans history with you today. I'm a writer, historian, and activist who works in many mediums. But let's just dive right in. Let's go to the first slide. In 1920s, Berlin was a wild place to be. Known as Europe's City of Sin, Berlin was home to dozens of nightclubs, catering to every strand of what we now think of as the LGBTQ plus community. Take your pick. Dapper lesbians in tailored suits congregated at places like Mali und Dingle. The boys flocked to any number of venues, such as the Adonis Lounge, and any keen transvestite, what we would today call trans, but more on that later, could find their way to the most famous of all, El Dorado. A sign out front declared, "Here it is right." But nightlife wasn't the only thing Berlin had going. A world of opportunity was opening up thanks to the bold activism of the Institute for Sexual Research and its founder, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld. For years, people who wanted to change their sex had approached all manners of doctors and early psychiatrists, but had been largely dismissed as aberrant, perverted, or hopeless cases. This all changed with Hirschfeld, a gay Jewish sexologist who set his sights on the emancipation of all sexual and gender minorities. Next slide, please. Hirschfeld's institute took trans people seriously, considering a variety of legal, social, and medical options to alleviate the suffering of people who wanted to live cross-gender lives. 3 of his patients can be seen here: Toni Ebel, Charlotte Scharlack, and Dora Richter. From 1921 to 1933, Dora, on the right, was the first patient to undergo innovative surgical techniques, including the first modern vaginoplasty. She, Charlotta, and Toni all lived in the Institute, employed variously as maids, secretaries, and translators. Medical transition was not the only innovative idea to come out of the Institute. Trans people at this time in Germany could be subject to arrest for cross-dressing in public and, relatedly, were largely barred from most forms of paid work. Hirschfeld used his connections to the municipal authorities to create the first known legal recognition of trans people in modern history. Referred to as walking papers or a transvestite pass. Put up the next slide, please. These documents were issued by police to ensure that patients of Hirschfeld would not be arrested. This man, Berthold Botgereit, was assigned female at birth, and through the use of his transvestite pass was able to get a job and blend into society as a man. He managed to survive the war and live the rest of his life quietly working for the Postal Service, as far as we can tell. For a time, trans people were able to live openly, access basic medical care, and even receive a form of legal recognition, but all was not well in Germany. The progressive and permissive nature of interwar Berlin was contentious and used as fuel for the growing chorus of populist voices who coalesced into the Nazi Party. Magnus Hirschfeld and his institute became public enemies, accused of spoiling the soul of German youth with all things effeminate, Jewish, and homosexual. Put up the next slide. When Hitler rose to power as chancellor in 1933, the Nazi-aligned German Students' Union mounted an attack on the institute on May 6, 1933. They forced their way into the building and happily took photos of themselves destroying everything they found. Some 20,000 books and case files were rounded up and a few days later taken to the Opernplatz and burned along with other books deemed un-German. Go to the next slide. That's these famous photos of the book burnings. The Library and Archive of the Institute, thought to be the largest collection of LGBT research material in history to that point, made up the bulk of what was burned that day, though not the only things that were burned. Along with them, a bust of Magnus Hirschfeld was burned. And you remember Dora Richter, she was there the day the Nazi students sacked the Institute. For many years, people believed that she had disappeared following that day, and some presumed she may have been murdered, including, until recently, me. However, recent research suggests that Dora likely made it out alive and relocated back to her hometown in what is now Czechia. She appears to have lived until at least 1939 when she drops out of the census records. But not everyone was so lucky. Indeed, Charlotta, the middle woman in the next picture, was eventually caught and sent to an extermination camp. But thanks to the miraculous save of her partner, Toni, on the left here, she was actually redirected to a deportation camp and instead shipped off to America. Holocaust historians are still uncovering the fates of many trans people, including a number who died in camps. To learn more about this period, check out the new Netflix documentary El Dorado, Everything the Nazis Hated, where you might see a familiar face. On to the next slide. So, what do we mean by trans history? You might have caught me using the word transvestite earlier. It's impossible to talk about trans history without talking about language. One of the frequent criticisms levied at trans history is the idea that because the way we use the word trans is recent, it then must follow that trans people are a recent phenomenon. So I think it's good to pause and reflect on what we mean here. Do we mean that every person we discuss would have used that language to describe themselves? For me and most of the historians I work with, trans history is simply a shorthand for discussing the broad range of people across time and cultures who seek to live cross-gender lives. There may be a wide variety of motivations, ways people understood themselves and embodied those self-understandings. But the material fact remains the same, that some people lived cross-gender lives or inhabited social, cultural, or religious categories beyond those deemed female and male in contemporary Western society. The specificities of their contexts, language, and self-understandings do matter, but these do not stop us from recognizing the resonances they have with all other people living cross-gender lives throughout history. But if we do only exist when we have this specific term, then so too are heterosexuals completely new, only having existed since the term was coined in 1869. Many figures we discuss in trans history have had different lenses applied to them over time by feminist historians, gay and lesbian historians, and now trans historians. But the facts remain largely the same. I'm a yes and kind of girl. I think all of these lenses provide us fascinating insight, not only into how these people may have lived, but more importantly, what we find compelling about their stories today. The next person I want to touch on highlights some of these issues. In 1791, Haiti was one of the most profitable colonies in the New World. Profits squeezed violently out of the bodies of hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans. I won't belabor the horrors of this period, but it suffices to say that enough was enough. On August 14th, 1791, enslaved people gathered at Bois Caiman in a ceremony calling upon their deities for deliverance. Answering that call, the spirits Ogu and Ezili Danto, later identified with Our Lady of Chactacawa as seen here, called for what would become the first successful slave revolt in human history. Answering that call, strange as it sounds, was a plantation owner. In the hills above Leogan, Romain, a mixed-race free person of color, ran a small coffee plantation called True Coffee. But revolution was in the air in more ways than one. Romain began dressing as a woman and holding her own religious ceremonies in a small chapel for the Virgin Mary. Though illiterate, she would go into a trance in the tabernacle and write down messages supposedly from the Virgin Mary, who, like Ezili Danto, was calling for revolution and the overthrow of the French elites. Romaine la Prophetess was born then, and she called together a revolutionary army of enslaved and freed people of color that numbered in the thousands. With her army, and I use she, her pronouns here specifically because the only records signed by her feature both her name and epithet La Prophetess in the feminine. Romain took control of two of the most important cities of southern Haiti, Léogâne and Jacmel. This True Coffee Rebellion was one of the most successful early uprisings of the Haitian Revolution until French reinforcements arrived and drove them back. Exactly what happened to Romaine la Prophetess is unknown. She may have been hanged, as were most early leaders of the revolution, though no records exist of this, unlike the other leaders. Some believe that she had escaped over the border to Santo Domingo, modern-day Dominican Republic. Unfortunately, much of her story, including what language she may have used to describe her gender, is lost to history. All we know for certain is that she insisted on wearing women's clothing, being referred to in the feminine, and that she led one of the most successful, if brief, uprisings in the Haitian Revolution that would go on to lead to the end of the transatlantic slave trade and transform the world as we know it. On to the next slide. Why does history matter? Why does trans history matter? We live in a period of seemingly unrelenting animosity towards trans people. I don't know if you've opened a newspaper, turned on the news, or perhaps scrolled through Twitter or TikTok anytime in the past 3 years. You may have noticed that trans people are currently being held responsible for nearly every social ill imaginable. We're corrupting teenagers by giving them blue hair and pronouns. We're infecting libraries with drag queen story hours. We're practically forcing everyone to chug synthetic hormones. And according to Vladimir Putin, we might even be responsible for the war in Ukraine. And that's certainly the picture you get if you looked at any British newspaper. To dehumanize and ultimately eradicate a people, you must make them bereft of history. Trans people are told that we are a people without a history. We are constantly imagined as a new and thoroughly modern threat to civilization, Frankenstein's monsters running wild. But this is ahistorical nonsense. While language and identities and the meanings we ascribe to them evolve and change drastically over time, their material facts remain the same. People who have actively sought to live cross-gender lives have always been a feature of human culture, from 1920s Berlin to 1790s Haiti, and as far back as ancient Sumer, contemporary Iraq, where the goddess Inanna had a class of priests who castrated themselves and lived as women. Indeed, one of the earliest surviving pieces of writing, the Hymns to Inanna, written by Sumerian priestess Enheduanna, the first named author in human history, ascribes to Inanna this great power: to turn a man into a woman or a woman into a man is yours, Inanna. On to the last slide. While the Nazi regime crushed gay, lesbian, and indeed trans communities during the war, they did not succeed in destroying us. Indeed, history has proven one thing about queer and trans people: all attempts to destroy us will fail. The post-war period saw the emergence of a new transsexual identity as trans people sought out connections to each other, formed communities, and found sympathetic doctors who pioneered new techniques in hormonal and surgical transitions. One member of this new cohort, Britain's own April Ashley, had been a female impersonator and model in the 1950s, and by the 60s had gotten a quickie sex change in Morocco before making the dreadful mistake of marrying into the British aristocracy. April removed herself from the lecherous clutches of her husband, a minor baron, only for him to file annulment on the grounds that she had been born male, a fact that he not only knew before their marriage, but for which he had actively sought her out. This case, Corbett v. Corbett, resulted in the 1970 court decision that removed the ability of all trans people in Britain to legally change our gender, until the campaign by Press for Change won us the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which one of our speakers today had a hand in. Across time and across culture, people living cross-gender lives have fought for our rights and ability to live our lives with safety and dignity. Whether seen as artists, religious figures, revolutionaries, post officers, or, as certain wealthy people with nothing better to do would have it, wreckers of civilization, we have existed and will continue to exist in one form or another. This is the power and strength of our history, our ancestors who hold us up and show us the way even in the most troubled of times. So let Trans History Week be a celebration of all those who have come before and a beacon to those still yet to come.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That was incredible. I'm always learning new things from you. That was great. I didn't know that Berlin was called the city of sin, so I feel really cool now that I can call myself a sinner. That's quite nice. So yeah, like that, and also I've just got my transvestite pass this year, so in my passport, so that's really cool. And 2270 BCE from Nana. That's incredible, isn't it? That we've always been here. Yeah, and those photos always strike me every time I see them from that period, the burning of the books, because I remember seeing that when I was in secondary school learning history and not knowing the context was that trans clinic, right? So very, very powerful. And thank you also for trailing one of our guests on the panel. So that's amazing. So thank you very much for Morgan. To Morgan, I want you to just give loads of reactions in the chat. I want to see some hearts, some claps. Amazing. Oh my God, I love seeing that. Thank you so much, Morgan. I really appreciate you joining us today. And I know that you're going to stick around for the rest of it. So thank you for doing that. I am going to now talk a little bit about the guidance for this year's Trans History Week, the inaugural Trans History Week. So this workbook is the single most important artifact that we will create each and every year. And this is the first time we're creating it. It contains within it 4 stories that illuminate and teach 4 lessons. And it's here to inspire and empower all of us in our present. And we're releasing it weeks out from Trans History Week itself, which is on the 6th to the 12th of May, in order to inspire you today to mark the week in your own way, and using these 4 stories as an easy and robust guide to do just that. So to talk about this a little bit, I just want to introduce 2 people from the Trans History Week world. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Gray Burkstow, pronouns he, him. They're lead researcher and writer for Trans History Week. And also I want to invite Jamie Wareham, pronouns he, him, founder of Queer AF. So welcome both. So I'm going to start with you, Jamie. Why is this important to Queer AF, and what's your role in Trans History Week?
So I joke a lot about our not so secret militant queer agenda to infiltrate the media and change it from the inside. That's kind of our like vibe. So we're here as a not-for-profit publisher to try and help a new generation of queer creatives do what they do best. And so when Marty popped up and went, oh, this article we did is being shared around the internet quite a lot and being used as a tool for liberation, and wouldn't it be cool if there was more of that? I went, okay, cool. How do you imagine that? And here we are 6 months later, having launched what is the biggest thing that QueerF has done since we launched as a publisher 2 years ago, thanks to this incredible team of trans creatives. So it's really exciting. But for me, like what I think is really wonderful to see is how the power of stories, which is sometimes a little bit of a cliche, but actually we know how much it moves people forward. Like I think a great recent example was how much the post office drama shifted the entire legislation of that issue, and that's exactly what the power of these kind of moments have. So I'm really excited to see where Trans History Week takes the rest of the UK and in fact the world.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for continuing to like inspire me and like support me in this journey. I mean, you've imagined what this could be way more than I did. I was just like, oh, we should do a Trans History Week, and can somebody go and do that? And you were like, okay, like let's do it properly. And I've been exhausted ever since, but it's amazing. So thanks for continuing to encourage that. So I want to bring in you now, Gray, as the lead researcher and writer. I want you to tell me a little bit about the lessons that are in the workbook and how you went about researching the workbook.
Right. Well, thank you, Marty, and thank you everybody who's here. Developing this guidance document has been a bit of a passion project for me. I'm a researcher at heart. I've done it as a job for many years. And it was really important to find the real roots, to find a thorough line in history that we can look back and say, yeah, we've always been here. That's, the first lesson that we have in the book. We've always been here because it's true. And as several people have already said, it is something that is seemingly up for debate right now. So what I really wanted to do was go back and tell stories throughout history that can not only be passed on to other people, but also to provide the primary sources for them, the citations, go back to the actual text, go back to what we have, so that we can say, see here, it's here, the evidence is here. It's not just our opinion. It's not just because we want to use certain words. And so I felt like really teaching these lessons, which hopefully we can build on as well, that they show us the truth behind our own identities, and they give us a real place to root ourselves in our culture, whatever our culture may be. And because We know that we have inherent biases. One of the things I also wanted to make sure that we did through producing the guidance was talk to many diverse folks, some of whom are actually, you know, presenting and speaking here today with you, to make sure that we knew where the blind folds were and that we can acknowledge and identify those. But really the main thing is I want to share this amazing history that we have, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what people do with it, what they create, how they bring it alive. And yeah, so just being a part of that has been amazing.
Great, thanks, Gray. I'm equally excited to see what people do with it. And I just love this structure of the lessons, right? So that we can't be a raised lesson as well is what Morgan spoke to a little bit in the keynote. And we're stronger together. This idea of our modern civil rights movement, you know, Marsha P. Johnson as the kind of profile we're bringing forth in that. And then more than trans, right? We opened with Sophie, some music from Sophie, and we focus on music and the artistry that's brought forward from trans plus musicians over the years. I just love how much work has gone into this and how much effort you've personally put into this and the whole team. And it's just an incredible document. So I do encourage you to, you know, there's another moment at the end to scan, but do get your phones out and scan that QR code and make sure that you've got the guidance in your hands as you create your plans for the week. So thank you, Gray. Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to now kind of move on to our panel, and I'm really excited to introduce our panelists, our trailblazers and our history makers, and have a conversation with them about the guidance itself and their kind of own reflections and affection for trans history. Firstly, so I'm going to introduce each of the guests now. So you've got Shivani Dave. I'm really glad that you are able to join us. Their pronouns are they, them. They're a journalist and broadcaster and were producer of the Logbooks podcast, which I encourage you all to go and listen to. It explores the archive from the LGBTQ+ helpline switchboard, which is one of our supporters, to trace untold stories from Britain's queer history. Another thing that I'm addicted to listening to at the moment. And then we also have Christine Burns. So Christine Burns, Morgan trailed earlier, pronouns she, her, notable for her work with Press for Change and getting through the Gender Recognition Act 20 years ago in 2004 in the UK. Also, editor of the book Trans Britain, Our Journey from the Shadows. And then finally, I want to introduce our third panelist, Rico Jacob Chase, pronouns he, him, LGBTQIA+ and Black rights activist, and the force behind UK Black Pride's 16th century campaign, and also Trans History Week project advisor. Welcome all. Welcome all. And I am, hello, Christine. Lovely to see all of your faces. I am going to jump straight to my first question for you. I'm going to start with you, Shivani. Would you rather me call you Shivani or Shiv?
Call me what you want, so long as you call me.
I love that. I'm going to call you Shiv.
Go for it.
So I'm going to start with you. Why does it matter that we learn about trans plus history?
Well, I would say it's not just trans plus history. It's all of our history. We live in a world that is more connected now than ever, and all of our stories, all of our histories intertwine. So yes, this history that we're focusing on is about trans plus people, but it doesn't mean that it's not relevant to people who are part of other communities or who might not identify with the trans plus label. I think it's one of those situations where the more you can learn about one another and each other's experiences, the more you can take from that. And it's only from knowing our past that we can improve upon our future. And so that is kind of why I think that's sort of the Cliff Notes version of why I think it's so important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shiv. I'm going to come to you next with the same question, Rico. You know, why does it matter to you that we learn our trans history?
Yeah, sure. I think it kind of emphasizes the idea that we didn't just, pop up during some sort of TikTok craze. We have always existed, but not even always existed. We've had a place in society, a respected place in society. So if you look at communities that were entirely independent across the globe, trans people were not even that what existed, but they had a respected place. So they were considered divine in the Temple of Artemis. They've got the Hijari in Southeast Asia. The reason why the Hijari actually have better gender recognition in India than they do in the UK is because it was traditional for the Hijari to dance at weddings. So they have better gender recognition in India than they do in the UK. So when you erase a part of the community, the problem is that they no longer have a voice in the community, no longer have a say, and they no longer can defend themselves when it comes to gender recognition and rights, etc. So recognizing that we always had a place is really, really important. Reason why I think whenever I do talk about trans and non-binary rights, in any presentation I do, I always talk about trans history, and I'll talk about colonialism later.
Can I just jump in super quickly and
Yeah.
just say, because we're all learning, this is literally what this is for, right? It's actually the Hijra community in South.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hijra.
That's cool. We're learning. I mean, we all make mistakes, we learn from them. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a really interesting point. The more you learn about kind of trans history as well, it's really interesting to find that the status of trans people or like gender diverse people in many different cultures was kind of this elevated status, right? In many cultures, and I find that really fascinating. And then we see that kind of repeated across different cultures as well. And the Hijra community, as you were talking about as well, that is one of our focuses for the We've Always Been Here section. So we kind of have a portrait of that community for this year. Christine, I wanna come to you on the same question as well. Why does it matter to you that we learn about our history? Oh, you've got your microphone on mute.
Right. I think I'm going to start on the personal. It's about 50 years ago that I first met other trans people as a student. And the first things that the people who were elders to me were teaching me was about the people that they knew who had come before. And that was vital to understanding that I wasn't just what I read about in the newspapers, that I actually was part of something that happens naturally because nobody else was telling me that. And then if we skip forward about 20 years from there to when I was becoming an activist, I'd never really appreciated history at school. But as soon as I was thinking about how do we change things, I realized that understanding how things came to be the way that they are at the time was vital to being able to understand how to change them. Another thing, obviously, as many of you have discussed, is that it's apparent that our history is vitally important to our enemies because they're trying to stop us from having it. They're trying to poo-poo anything we tell about our stories. They want to be able to say that we are a new and invalid thing that comes from too much time on TikTok. And actually excavating and explaining our history in detail, it really matters. And I think the other thing is that when you tell history, you always tell about human lives. And one of the things that I think that our enemies again want to do is to dehumanize us. So by telling our historical stories, we are actually countering that. And our stories are so damned interesting. They're full of people, being really, really brave to go against whatever forces were against them at the time, to be really sure of who they are in order to be able to assert that to other people. We've got a good story. And even, it's just, I think it's vital that we carry on talking about it. And there's an audience for it as well. My book has been incredibly popular because people want to know. And they always come back and say that these stories that I managed to bring into print were really important to them in understanding what we were about before people started trying to tell a pack of lies about us.
I think that's really interesting as well. It's really important to me. And one of the things that I've actually got your book behind me on the shelf as well, like you have, Christine. So I'm doing the Lord's work right now for you. That it really is powerful for me in terms of making me feel less dehumanized by learning my history, right? So the history, I kind of thought originally when I was thinking about this project that it would be a project completely centered on trying to convince cis people and shut down lies and stuff, but actually it's been so important and valuable to me and to other trans people and restorative and good for my well-being. So it's really important that we tell these stories to ourselves as well. That's what the interesting thing that came through for me, and what I took from what you were saying there about us shutting down this dehumanization, right? It's a good way to tackle it. So I want to come to our next question as well. So I'm going to start on this one with you. I'm going to come back to you again, Christine. So when did you first become aware of trans people? You were talking about it a little bit just then, but I just want to kind of go into that a little bit more.
It's almost 60 years ago. I was 12 years old, and I used to have the job in the morning on Sunday mornings of going and collecting the newspapers for my dad. And we had the News of the World and the Sunday Mirror, which will tell you everything you need to know about the kind of family background I had. And my parents were publicans, so the first thing they had to do before lunch was go and serve customers. So I got first dibs at the newspapers, and I was just 12 years old. I was just learning to be interested, and I'd seen on the A board outside the newsagents this story about April Ashley, and I was riveted. Now, it wasn't the first time I thought trans thoughts. You know, I can take that back to about when I was 4 years old, and I told my mum that I wanted to be a girl and I wanted to grow up to be a lady. But there were no cultural reference points other than seeing female impersonators on the television. So actually reading about somebody who was essentially what I thought I was, I suddenly didn't feel alone in the world, because I thought, 12 years old, I thought I was a unique freak. I was ashamed and I was frightened, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I didn't dare tell anybody. And I got rid of that misconception. I understood that I wasn't alone, but I also understood by the way that April Ashley was written about in the News of the World, because this was the run-up to her divorce case, that it was also, in societal terms, a bad thing to be. So I better stay in the closet for a bit longer.
Yeah, and I think you'll still get that to the day. But if you your first interaction with trans people is the papers, then you're going to feel that way at the moment, aren't you? It's quite a bad situation. I want to come to you, Shiv, next, and like ask the same question. When did you first become aware of trans people?
Yeah, I was nodding along to a lot of that because it felt like a very similar, even though decades apart, very similar sort of experience. So when I was a kid, I kind of used to say like, oh, I'm not a girl, I'm not a girl. My parents would be like, okay, you can be whatever you want to be. But they didn't even realize, I think, that it was anything like gendery. I think they were just like, this child thinks that they're going to be a raccoon or something. Like, I don't think it was like a gender thing in their minds, or even my mind, because I wasn't aware that that was a possibility. And then I remember sort of seeing newspapers, seeing these sort of really awful stories about people who are trans, written in a very sensationalist way. And I was kind of like, oh, that seems awful, like to be that person, because they're literally being piled on by the media and the press. That's terrible. I don't want to be like that at all. And I kind of like suppressed all these thoughts and feelings for a really long time until I went to university. And I actually I knew of trans people, I knew of non-binary people, but I didn't have anyone in my life that I'd met who was part of the trans plus community or open about that. And I met somebody in a pub, and they were like, yeah, my pronouns are they, them. And I was like, something like clicked in my brain. and I was like, oh wow, it just works. That's what I've been looking for the whole time. And like they were talking to me a little bit about what non-binary means and how it relates to them and their gender and their expression, and it just all like made perfect sense. And it's definitely something that like I'd not really seen or heard much about, and if I did, it was always quite negative. Like Christine, I felt like I was the only person in the world who had these feelings. I felt so isolated and alone by that. I didn't have the language to communicate what I was feeling. And the added layer of being a person of color, I was like first thinking I was the only queer brown person on the planet, let alone queer non-binary brown person. And so I guess through learning about history, I've been able to discover that actually like trans plus people in South Asian cultures have been celebrated. And it's so sad that that's been taken away from us as a sort of general knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Very so, and Rico, to you as well. I mean, is your feeling similar on this, or do you have different perspective?
I mean, I went through a curriculum that was section 28, so I didn't actually know about LGBT people at all. And it sounds odd saying, but I went to an all-girls school. So, you know, being labeled as a lesbian back then, that was a death sentence. So even like being gay or lesbian was problematic. So trans, that wasn't even the conversation. And you know, because I come from a sort of Caribbean-based family, where being part of the LGBT community isn't necessarily an accepted thing. I only really began addressing my identity age around about 25. And that was because I was receiving discrimination in a workplace environment for my identity. And then I just sort of said, be damned with it. You know, I refuse to live my life with anyone else's prejudice when it expectations. I said, you know, I'd rather be a bartender. I'd rather be a bartender in Soho than be in any setting where I'm feeling any of the pressure from my family or pressure from society in general. But I only realized that I was trans when I was sort of working as a bartender, when someone said to me, "You're not. Are you trans? Because you're not like any of the staff here. You're clearly a bloke, Rico." And it's like, "What's your pronouns?" I was like, "Oh, probably he, him, but don't worry about it." And they're like, "No, your pronouns are your identity." So I'm pretty much the product. The man you see today is pretty much the product of being part of the community, and the community effectively raised me to recognize what my boundaries are and how to set them. So yeah, I think I've experienced firsthand, you know, the lack of information and misinformation does perpetuate negative stereotypes about the community. And I do a lot of meditation, and from that, the meditation that I do is created by Black queer people, and they talk about that our ancestors were heavily genderless, and that even if necessarily your immediate family may not necessarily understand you, your ancestors would have known and embraced you, and you would have seen you as, you know, as a, I hate saying the word deity or priest or priestess because it kind of puts us on a sort of pedestal which shouldn't really exist in society. But we were seen as healers, as spiritual practitioners. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you, Rico. I really relate to a lot of what you were saying, actually. I mean, my understanding of my trans identity came really late. Again, similar reasons, and very deeply buried, really. So thank you for sharing that. I want to stick with you as well, Rico, for the next question. But before I do that, I just want to kind of nudge everybody to start asking your questions for our panelists, and think about what your key takeaways will be from this session. But yeah, let me stay with you, Rico. What are your key takeaways after reading the guidance? You're involved in consulting on the project, so yeah, what are your takeaways?
I would say take away some empowerment, take away some well-informed points. You know, you've got the ammunition there and ammunition probably is the right word, in order to sort of push back on society, push back and tell people, no, I am part of the community that's well respected, that's been through quite a fair bit of persecution and still exists today, still fights today. And I think a key point would be the erasure, something that I've kind of, as I've been consulting on this project, I always kind of emphasize that colonialism has erased us. And the same way that it is decided that women should have a voice, should have a bank account, and therefore a childbearing, the same way that we've had POC people, caution, trigger warning, only there for labor, putting it very, very delicately. It's the same way that, trans and non-binary people, LGBT people shouldn't exist. And as you have a quote unquote perfect society, it implies that people aren't perfect. And I really, really love activists that kind of recognize that, the point that we're all fighting against the same beast here. That's the reason why the feminist page talks a lot about trans rights, and I have a lot of respect for that social media platform. So I think if anyone reviewing this, take it to your office, take it to your employer and say, look, here's some free resource. You don't actually have to pay anyone in order to spread this word and address misinformation within offices. And as a trans and non-binary person, if you're in the room, here's some resources where you can begin exploring your history, so you can have that source of pride, in order to sort of hold your head high, as you should.
I like that. I love that a lot. Shiv, can I come back to you with the same question? What were your takeaways after reading the guidance?
Yeah, for me, it was about this idea that we're going to build community out of this. This is not just a celebration or a learning of our history, but this is an opportunity for us to find pockets of communities that we might not have otherwise known about, and discuss them, share them, learn from them, build on them. And for me, the community is basically the heart of everything that I do. So that's like the most important thing for me, to be able to build on those kinds of things, and to, even the way in which the guidance sort of sets out, sort of suggests how people can get involved with Trans History Week. It's the kind of thing that allows people to work collaboratively, whether that's speaking to trans elders or getting together with some friends and trying to do a bit of, research and understanding yourself. It's this way that we can be community while learning about our community. It makes sense in my head.
Yeah, lovely. Love that. We've absolutely learned that ourselves. So we've really developed such a community around this project. So that's a common theme that comes through, is these kind of thriving kind of gender diverse communities. It's always about kind of thriving with each other. That's what I love about it. And finally, Christina, I want to come to you with that same question. What were your key takeaways when you read that workbook?
Well, first off, I'm so blown away by the quality of the design and the production. But also the thing that struck me is that every time I read something like this, I learn about somebody new. The examples that you've got in this booklet are people that I've not read about anywhere else, and I've read quite widely. And I think that underlines the fact that we need to become much more aware of the size of our community. Back in the mid-90s, when I was lobbying Conservative ministers, I managed to get enough data from the Department of Work and Pensions to support the idea that there were maybe about 5,000 of us in the UK, because I wanted to be able to tell ministers, look, giving us legal rights isn't going to bring about an end to the world. And that was stretching things, because at the time they believed the nonsense from 1970s psychiatrists that reckoned that 1 in 35,000 people was a trans woman and 1 in 104,000 people was a trans man, in which case there were probably only 200 trans men in the entire country, and I knew all of them. So what am I coming around to saying was that our sights constantly are stretched. We now know from the the census of 2021 that there's probably at least 95,000 trans people who identify as trans women or trans men, and about 150,000 more people who identify as non-binary, and 250,000 between us is probably an underestimate. We're just, and it makes much more sense when there are more of us. I think we begin to realize why we should have such a rich history, and so that when you go trawling back through the records, you don't have to dig very deep. You're tripping over gender non-conforming people and learning about their stories. So I think this booklet, and I'm sure there will be future ones in years to come, I hope so, sets us off down that road of understanding trans people as a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Thank you so much, Christine, for the compliments on the booklet as well. Gray will be pleased, and Georgie as well, who beautifully designed that for us, and all of the photography in it from Bex Wade as well, which was amazing to have. I'm gonna jump to some questions now. And so therefore, yeah, some questions for you all. Let me have a look, see what we've had here. So keep putting your questions in. I'm gonna start with this one. So someone says, as a gay man struggling with my sexuality, Queer as Folk was such a welcoming program for gay life and camp and comedic way. Which representation in media has been the best for you to feel represented? That was from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, for that question. Who would like to take that question? Best representation in media.
The obvious answer, I think, is probably is it Sophia in Orange Is the New Black?
Oh yeah, so Laverne Cox's character.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, that was I mean, it's a great show as well, right? And it's very kind of usual representation in many ways. I think it's a really interesting question as well, because a lot of the representation in media that I consumed when I was very young as well. So Paddington Green, I don't, there was a BBC show called Paddington Green,
yes.
and there was a sex worker on there that was trans, and it was a very dark show, and it had portraits of people, and I just remember feeling like fascinated by this character, but also very scared. So it's hard to sometimes find that great representation, isn't it?
The makers of sorry.
I was going to say, I think 100% agree with that. It's quite hard, but I think things are getting better. Like the latest season of Sex Education had this incredible storyline. The character was called Cal, and it represented a trans masc Black person. So it was navigating the intersections of being a Black person, being trans masculine, and the way that story was handled was so beautiful. And even though like I'm an adult and I like to think I know who I am now, it was really affirming to just see that on screen, that there was just someone sort of like me a little bit. So hopefully it's getting better.
Yeah, I think it's getting better. There's certainly more of it than there was. I'm going to ask another question, Rico, unless you want to answer that one.
I mean, I'll go quickly. I mean, I don't necessarily look for media for representation. I know that it is there. I think I kind of prefer like people done in real life, and I think I always tend to find people that have done like awesome things. I'm always following trans non-binary people who are doing awesome things, and then like that's my inspiration. But no, I know that media representation is important, but yeah, I think that's probably.
Let me keep you there then, Rico, because somebody's asking here, is there a particular trans plus figure, event or story from history or present that really inspires you? So yeah, who is it that inspires you?
I think this is going to be a bit cliche when I say Marsha, but not necessarily in the story that everyone else seems to know. You know, the fact that she, sort of Sylvia Rivera, please correct me, dyslexiaing today. Yeah, was booed on stage, but you know, despite being booed, it still wanted to speak. And you know, after the Stonewall riots, they started Star. But I think also that the story of perseverance and the fact that the fight, the relentless fight, you know, both of them were on benefits, and a lot of them were sex workers, but they still took it upon themselves to fight for people who didn't have a voice at the time. And the fact that Marsha used to walk through the park in like glamorous outfits, and you know, someone came up to her and said, "Oh, I really, really like your scarf," and she was like, "Oh, honey, have it, give it to you." Like that giving, that caring, that nurturing energy is something that I really, really aspire to be, and I kind of try and mirror my own personality and my values and my traits on. So the kindness despite adversity is kind of, those are my heroes. Yeah.
I remember listening to a podcast where Marsha had been recorded, right? And then they were bringing this audio back, and it was just so powerful to just hear directly from Marsha around what felt like a kitchen table. So hearing those voices like come through as well.
Also, Rain Dove, them. I've interviewed them recently from the Not a Phase LGBT History Month. They've basically taken their own money. I think they said it publicly. Yeah, they had about 500,000, and then after about 2 years of just trying to get people out of Ukraine, trying to get people out of Palestine, they just gave away all their money because they was like, someone needs to do something. I'm not advising that anyone here just gives away all their money, but I'm saying that they have a big heart. It's the people with the big hearts that kind of go for what really needs to happen that I respect.
Shiv, who inspires you?
It's such a, like, I'm constantly inspired by people daily, but it's one of those questions where as soon as you ask it, I forget everyone's name. I think I'm inspired by some of the people who don't get a lot of recognition, some of the people who work within like community groups and social spaces and stuff like that, that keep our people going, you know. I'm not really into like, you know, there are activists and there are influencers and there are all these people who have done incredible work, and that's great, but I am inspired by the people who like turn up to the LGBTQ plus youth groups in the tiny village where there is no other representation, and they probably get funny sideways looks when they're walking through their very small conservative town, but still do it week in, week out anyway to support the young people around them. Those kinds of people are who inspire me. The people who are just doing the work to have the community sort of help the community thrive, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Those people are the people that inspire me as well. Couldn't agree more on that. Christine, I want to come to you with a different question, unless you wanted to contribute on that one.
Well, I was just going to put in a very quick mention, because I'm originally a technologist, for people like Lynn Conway and Sophie Wilson, because if it wasn't for their work in the 1970s, we wouldn't be having these conversations over these devices. And it really gives me a kick that so many of the things we take for granted in the modern world have come from pioneers in inventors who were trans. Similarly with the electronic music and Wendy Carlos. Wherever you look, you find trans people beavering away and actually making major contributions to the world that we inhabit.
What I remember about reading one of your books that you wrote as well, Christine, is you talking about how email transformed how you did the lobbying effect. And I was like, wow, okay, we're way back, are we? Like email was the thing that came in that really helps you with the lobbying. And so yeah, I've been kind of immersing myself in your writing more recently, as you know, as we developed Trans Plus Solidarity Alliance, inspired a lot by Press for Change. But that really struck me as well, as what you were saying. And I want to just stick with you, Christine, quickly about like, what can trans history teach us about how to navigate our current challenges?
Well, I think the first thing it can teach us is that in some ways we've been here before and we overcame it. When I was first tempted into activism, I really couldn't see a way forward. I couldn't see, everything was against us. We had absolutely no rights. really. And to look at that and to look at the way that we were treated routinely as Sunday newspaper outing fodder. It was, yeah, how on earth do you change things when everything's against you? So the reason I've been so keen to tell the inside story of Press for Change and the wider story of how we came up as a community, from individuals through community and then activism to where we were when we were so rudely interrupted in about 2017, that telling that tells us that there is a secret, to how to get back on track. This will not last forever.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question. It's a really good question for a lot of the people that I know are on this call. So what do you feel is the single most impactful thing that an ERG, an employee resource group in a business, an LGBT network, can do to help increase awareness and acceptance of our trans siblings in the workplace? Who would like to start there with that one?
I think
go on, sorry.
Shiv.
I was just going to say there's a few things that can be done, and like there's no one size fits all. It completely depends on the starting point of the organization, but having protocols in place to really safeguard trans members of staff is massively important, and then also to have a very clear workflow of what happens when something is triggered within that process. So if there is a colleague making comments towards another colleague, to have a very clear line of what happens in those situations, with some sort of result, rather than just talking to a person. Actually say, like, you keep doing this, you're going to get sacked, or you keep behaving this way and you'll be disciplined in a workplace way. I don't know, I'm a freelancer, I don't know, is it like school? Can you do detentions for workplaces? But then I think you also need to prevent that sort of situation from happening in the first place. So being loud and being vocal, being visible about being a safe and inclusive place for trans people to work is important. Giving trans plus people the opportunities that they may need if they are undergoing any sort of gender affirming healthcare or any sort of medical treatment for their transition. So having a transitioning in the workplace policy that is not only written but effective and thorough, and also communicates the process of it, but also is accessible, so that you're not necessarily having to ask your line manager to access it, but you can access it yourself should you think about undergoing surgery but not feeling comfortable to talk to your manager about it yet, if you want to know what the process is first, things like that. Yeah, I could go on, but I think Christine had some ideas.
That's great. Christine, do you want to add anything to that briefly?
Yeah, I was just going to say, do it now before anybody comes out to you. The stories of organizations coping with trans people is usually when the first person comes out, and then they have to start thinking, oh shit, what are we going to do? Whereas actually, to start by planning to have policies, to have supportive materials, to have a plan which all the staff can see, I think actually conveys so much, particularly to the person who might be on the staff who's thinking, would I be able to come out here? Because I left my academic career in the mid-70s because I didn't believe that I would be able to come out to them. That's a profound sadness of mine that I didn't continue down that path. I did lots of other happy things afterwards, but my life changed because I didn't imagine that my professors and the staff and students would actually support me if I were to tell them then in 1977 who I was and what I wanted to do.
I think that's a really important point of having the policies before, I hear it a lot. We don't have any trans employees, so well, you don't know that you do, but they very well probably do. And so I think that's definitely a really important piece of advice for businesses. I want to come back to you, Shiv, quickly on this question, because I know you do a lot of this. So for community-based artists, is there any advice you can give to look at implementing the guidance in community projects?
Yeah, take it, run with it, get creative. There are some fantastic starting points of stories of people, of communities that this year's Trans History Week is looking to highlight, and try and take inspiration from that and create something. Obviously, art is such a big spectrum of what counts as art, so it depends on what your medium is, but there's definitely enough material in there to find some inspiration and get making.
Right. And Rico, I want to come to you as well, because I know you do a lot of community work.
Just on the previous question, I think I'll just, because I think
Oh, go on.
yeah, I think having the idea that there's an item at the top of the list, I understand the logic behind it, but when you're trying to amend company culture, I mean, I was talking to someone recently and they had an anti-racism or a Afro-Caribbean group within the organization. And the idea was, oh, you should be happy because you have the Afro-Caribbean group. But then they came up with about 5 or 6 asks within the organization. And somehow over the year, because they were asking too much, the group got disbanded. So I think it's really, really important to recognize that it's not, if I give you the thing at the top of the list, you're most likely going to be happy and therefore everything will be fine. I think the idea in order to address discrimination within an organization, I think it's probably best to put the community first, that group that you're trying to protect or flourish within your organization, and all the other action points kind of come or stem from that. So if you empower people within the organization at various levels, then the asks come from that. I wanted to say.
Thank you, Rico. I've got a question specifically here for you, Christine. Let me know if you want to answer it. So this is from Jude. I think this is my friend Jude Guasamaki. Do you think that history can play an important part when it comes to the future of working toward trans plus equality? If so, how?
Yes, I mean, this is, as I say, this is the thing that has always pushed me to ensure that I've written down as much of what I know of the last 50 years and got other people to do it, because all the things that brought us to this place, where we've got laws still on the statute book that protect us and can support us, even though people are trying to knock them down and delete them. There's a lot, and we did it on very few resources. We used to be proud in Press for Change that we only had £5,000 a year to spend, because most of the people we represented didn't have jobs in the early days. So we couldn't ask them for much money. And a lot of the money we got was from psychiatrists and surgeons who felt that they could do their bit by sending us some money. So it was never about money. It's actually about understanding the arguments, understanding the history, and being able to make the better argument and get to know people, put yourself in front of people. I got access to so many government ministers in the early 90s because I got to know my local MP, who just happened to then get promoted to be John Major's chief whip. And therefore he helped me get letters that I wrote in front of the people who actually needed to see these arguments. I don't know.
No, it's great. And yeah, as you were talking about that as well, I mean, myself and Jude kind of have been going through your Pressing Matters ebooks and applying a lot of what you wrote down to today, really, with Trans Plus Solidarity Alliance, our new organization. So thank you for writing it down, because it's really helped us to be able to understand what you did and what was effective and what we could look to replicate as learning our history and applying it today. I think that's amazing. So yeah, thank you again for that. I'm still working my way through a lot of that, but a lot of that's informed what we're doing. I want to come to you, Rico, as well, because this question is very connected to what Christine was talking about there. So Rico, Yeah, someone's asking you this, Rico. As someone engaging Whitehall on trans plus issues, as the community is openly persecuted by the current ministers in charge, is there any hope? Can you give someone hope?
Is there any hope? I have met quite a few MPs that are pro-trans rights, that are fighting tooth and nail behind the scenes, that are equally as frustrated, if not beyond angry, may even use the word disgusted about what's happening right now. So I would say there are several people. Sorry, I'm just looking at the hotel. There's someone in the window. Never mind. I won't tell you what they're doing. Yeah, it's really distracting. Yeah, I would say that there are people in Whitehall that are on our side and will continue to be our side. With our current government, I wouldn't say I'm the best person to speak on this, but I would say that I've pretty much given up on this current administration. But that doesn't mean that it's not important to keep developing those relationships, to keep putting trans and non-binary people in front of them, to make them realize precisely who they're discriminating against. You know, we just aren't something that, you know, clickbait for the Daily Mail. These are actual people who have, you know, hopes and dreams and personalities, and, you know, you kind of make them more 3D. So Marty, you're heavily involved in that, so you can kind of give me your take on that as well. But I think it's really, really important that we do develop those relationships, and we see where it goes. But we are still putting up a fight. There's loads of people who are more well informed and have the more expertise, who are still putting up a fight. Yeah.
Well, it comes for me, it's about people are people, and it's just about education. Let's embrace education. We can be in those spaces and we can educate people that are willing to listen. And there are loads of people that are willing to listen that do need their education. And more trans people in those spaces more often educating our ministers, and we'll make progress. And it's what Christine managed to do. And we're making some progress, right? I'm really interested in speaking to Shiv finally on this as well, because I know, Shiv, you're involved in a lot of kind of protest work as well, and that's a very important part of change making as well as lobbying is. So yeah, what's your perspective as well, especially looking at the modern civil rights movement as part of the workbook?
Yeah, I think I had a conversation with this incredible activist, Femi Otitoju, about a year ago and 2 years ago now, and something that she said stuck in my head, and has kept me going every single day, every single time I'm feeling like I'm burning out, or I'm feeling like I can't fight the fight anymore. What she said stays with me, and it was about the fact that, you know, I think there are some people who are naturally in this world do this kind of work. They want to progress human rights in whatever way they can, whether that's through journalism, activism, community work, whatever. And I have this feeling sometimes that, you know, it's very important for me to do this work because that's who I am. But it probably isn't going to change anything. And it's a sad thought, but it's something that can make you, it's something that I have felt over the years, particularly as trans rights have been under attack. Femi said, you might feel like that, yeah, but with wider queer rights, we've seen so much change. In her lifetime alone, so much has happened. There was a partial decriminalization of homosexuality. There was the full decriminalization. There was, you know, Section 28. There was lesbians finally being able to get rights to have their own kids after a divorce. All of these different things came, and gay marriage, like, that's not even a thing that I care about, but like, that's a huge step. And she was like, you feel like that you're not getting any wins, but you are, because everything is a slow step into in the right direction. So that's kind of what keeps me going, and that's kind of gives me hope. You know, in the lifetime of some people who are on this call, we've seen so much change, so much progress in the best possible way. And what's to say that's not going to happen in the lifespan of all of us here, the younger people on this call?
Yeah, No, that's great. I mean, I kind of 100% feel the way that you do about that. It can be frustrating sometimes to feel like you're not making any movement forward, but we absolutely are and can do. And I feel like in our lifetime, we're just holding a baton and we're going to pass it to the next generation. And we're making all these positive small steps forward. And we just need to remind ourselves that we probably won't see all of the change we want to see in our lifetimes, but we will see a lot. And I know Christine has obviously seen a lot of that change, which is really empowering for me to kind of see. And you've been involved in a lot of it as well, Christine. So, and I think as well, the interesting thing for me is that the importance of education and lobbying, and also the importance of protesting as well. And it's all part of that change making that we can make those incremental steps forward. I'm going to bring this panel to a close now. I'm just so glad that you could all join us today. You're all amazing in everything you do. And I'm just, so incredibly grateful that you would give up your time today to talk about Trans History Week and help our project in all the different many ways that you are. So thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Can we get lots of reactions, lots of hearts and claps and all of those lovely things? And the little party, the little party poppers as well. That's great. Thank you, everybody. That was really cool. I don't know how you felt about that, but I learned so much through that process. It was really great to hear from Christine Burns about how kind of you overcome kind of those moments of difficulty, and from Shiv about how like community and how valuable that is, and how we just keep finding these pockets of community in our history. I'm so inspired by what Christine has done with Pressing Matters, and inspired by everybody actually, and the activism work that they're doing, and kind of the next generation that is kind of the Ricos of this world and Shivs of this world. So that's I just feel restored by this conversation. I hope you do too. I now want to move on to just finalize it, just talking about the guidance a little bit more, because the guidance is there to help you, and I want to kind of give you a sense of like what we're using it for, right? So it's inspired us to kind of create our own official content and events. And what some of the things we're doing is we're creating a series of written pieces with accompanying illustrations. And we are having those made by 14 trans plus creators that are all getting paid for their creative work. We're also creating a podcast series where we're having 6 trans people kind of do those individual podcast episodes. So I'm really excited about listening to that. As you know, as I've said a few times in this, I'm gorging on Trans History podcast, and I'm kind of fresh out. I need a new thing. We've got a live podcast recording event as well on the 7th of May. And so please save that date in your calendar. There will be some more information about that coming next week. We've got a poetry event as well that same week, which will follow a little bit later. That's called Transcending Words. And what's really exciting is many businesses are already planning events for Trans History Week. I hear about more and more every day now. And also really cool, one of our supporters, Brighton Trans Pride, are having a photography exhibition. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. And a handful of brands are also inviting us to talk with them and bring our Trans History Week show on the road, as it were, which is great. So really happy about that and looking forward to those. So what could you do, right? I think there's a few ideas. I mean, you could do anything, and I'm sure you'll come up with your own plans. But you could do a cross ERG event. You could do some content on social media. You could tell some trans history stories that are within your own business. The Royal Mail has some amazing ones, for example. There's a film screening. You could do a film screening. You could do a book club. I'm sure Christine would love you to do a book club about their book, but other books are available too. And you could run a lunch and learn. You could do a zine making workshop, all sorts that you could do. And what I would encourage you to do as well is bring in trans plus history makers into your business and have them on a panel, have them do a keynote, the people that you saw speak today are incredible and would be amazing to bring into your business. So please do reach out to them separately as well. And also, you can work with us directly to do something in your workplace and help raise funds in the process of doing so for our mission. So I'd really welcome doing that, coming in and talking with you. So yeah, before we end though, I must thank our fully volunteer team of Trans History Week. Each and every one of them, absolutely incredible. A lot of tasks are super, super boring, and everyone's so enthusiastic, and it's incredible because then they don't all fall on me, which would be awful. I'm knackered, I'm so tired, and so are a lot of the other people that have been involved in this. So please, please, please absolutely spam the reactions for all of our volunteers. And thank you, everybody here, because, sticking through that whole call as well, so many of you, thank you for attending. Thank you for showing up for trans people. Thank you for being interested in history that helps us all. And before you go though, I want you to grab your phone and scan that code. And I know everyone says that, but I need you to do that. That's how you'll download the guidance. There's also a quick survey, and I mean it is really quick, and it really, really helps us to develop sponsorships against this in future years. So really do us a favor, do me a favor, do everybody involved a favor, and just give us a bit of your time. And finally, yeah, like I said, download the guidance, make sure you kind of consume it all and have it inspire you. And together, let's make space for the Trans Plus history lesson that we never had. Well, that's your lot. And all that remains to say is go forth and make history.